Multiple countries are pushing for a ceasefire across the Israel-Lebanon border to halt the missile attacks that have claimed more than 600 lives in 3 days. The proposal was put forward in the United Nations Security Council by the United States and France, and it's been endorsed by many countries, including several Arab states. It calls for a 21-day ceasefire to allow civilians to return to their homes on both sides of the border. U.S. President Joe Biden said the de-escalation between Israel and the militant group Hezbollah was critical.
As you can see, we put out a statement for a 21-day ceasefire along the Israeli-Lebanese border. We were able to generate significant support from Europe as well as the Arab nations. It's important this war not widen. I'll have more to say about it tomorrow.
While efforts to secure a ceasefire continue, Israel's army chief has put troops on alert for a possible ground invasion into Lebanon. Israel has been pounding Lebanon with airstrikes since Monday, killing hundreds and forcing tens of thousands to flee their homes. Hezbollah militants also launched their deepest strike into Israel yet, targeting the headquarters of Israel's intelligence agency Mossad near Tel Aviv. Israel says that missile was intercepted. DW's Emily Gordine joins us now from Jerusalem. Emily, how likely is it that the Israeli army will carry out a ground assault in Lebanon?
Well, we saw this morning that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his wife left Israel to attend the UN's General Assembly in New York. So I think it's unlikely that we will see the launch of a ground invasion while he's away. That being said, yesterday we saw the IDF's Chief of Staff, Herzl Halevi, visit troops at the northern border, and he said to them, quote, "You hear the jets overhead. We have been striking all day. This is both to prepare the ground for your possible entry and to continue degrading Hezbollah." And he later said to them, "Prepare yourselves." And we also saw yesterday that the IDF mobilized 2 reserve brigades. So we're seeing a lot of preparation for a possible ground invasion. That being said, there has not been any confirmation whatsoever that this will actually happen. And you also need to remember here that a ground invasion is easier said than done, maybe. It is, military experts in Israel have been saying that it will be much more dangerous, it will be much more risky, it will lead to a higher death toll among Israeli soldiers, likely. And of course, the question remains whether support for such a ground operation in light of the higher number of fatalities will continue. But also there are questions over how successful a ground operation can be.
Now, multiple countries are calling for a ceasefire across the Israel-Lebanon border. Is that expected to make any difference, Emily?
Well, it would certainly give both sides a moment of respite. In Lebanon alone, over 500,000 people have been displaced. Over 500 people have been killed, among them women and children. In Israel, over 70,000 residents now for a year now have not been able to return to their homes in the north. Yesterday we saw Hezbollah launch a ballistic missile onto Tel Aviv for the first time, showing Israel essentially that it is able to still launch rockets very deep inside of Israel. So over the last few days, we've really seen an escalation of the fighting between the two sides, which is, of course, what has so many countries around the world also worried about a further escalation. And that's where this ceasefire deal proposal comes in. The idea behind this is that it will give both sides time to find a diplomatic resolution of this conflict. That being said, we're already seeing responses from Israeli politics in Israel. Israel's Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich has spoken out against the proposal, and opposition leader Yair Lapid has also said that he supports the deal, but only for 7 days, in order for not allow Hezbollah to rehabilitate its command and control systems. And also we're hearing from communities in the north that people have been mentally preparing for a ground invasion, and they see it as a loss of momentum if it didn't happen. So a lot of pressure also inside of Israel to keep up the momentum.
Emily, thank you very much. That was our correspondent, Emily Gordine, in Jerusalem. Well, Israel says its operation in Lebanon is aimed at allowing tens of thousands of residents to return to border towns evacuated due to Hezbollah missile strikes. Meanwhile, Lebanon's foreign minister says 500,000 residents have been displaced there since the regional conflict escalated almost a year ago. Many have fled in recent days and are creating a refugee crisis within Lebanon's own borders.
Gridlock as people flee southern Lebanon to escape the dozens of airstrikes that have hammered the area. Heading north, where many have ended up sleeping in parks and schools like here in the city of Sidon. Evacuees say they've just escaped hell.
The situation was tough. The roads were blocked and airstrikes landed in front of us every time we tried to move. Finally, around 6 p.m, a car took us and we got here at dawn.
We are in a crisis, economic crisis, financial crisis, health crisis. We have nothing. War plus war, it's beyond our expectation, beyond I didn't expect that. War, people left their villages, left their homes. No word can explain this situation.
Lebanon is a tiny country bordering Israel and Syria. It covers just 10,000 square kilometers and has a population of 5.5 million people. The airstrikes have targeted areas under Hezbollah control in the south, driving people to the cities of Sidon, the capital Beirut, and Tripoli, despite airstrikes there as well, and over the Syrian border. The country is still recovering from a massive explosion in 2020 that flattened much of Beirut's harbor area, helping spark a currency crisis. In addition, Iran has long meddled in Lebanese politics, stoking religious tensions and backing Hezbollah. The militant group has been launching missiles at Israel since Hamas's terror attack of October 7th last year, saying it supports Hamas and the Palestinians. Lebanon also took in an estimated 1 million Syrian refugees in the past decade, many of whom have now been uprooted again. Now Syria says hundreds have crossed over to its side of the border as it prepares to receive more people. Aid workers say they weren't ready for anything on this scale.
We are lacking food and hygiene kits. The schools have big issues with bathrooms and trying to find fuel for electricity. We are truly witnessing a struggle in the operation room, but we are trying as best we can.
As the refugee crisis continues, Lebanon says only the U.S. can make a difference in the situation.
More on this, we can talk to Bob Kitchen now. He's Vice President of Emergencies at the International Rescue Committee. Thanks for being with us. Bob, you have colleagues on the ground in Lebanon. What are they saying about the situation there now?
Yeah, I'm speaking to them on an ongoing basis. They're saying that the situation has changed massively, so very, very rapidly. More than 500,000 people on the streets, fleeing for their lives, carrying just what they can push into their cars as they leave. They're fleeing the south, going to the Bekaa Valley, going to Beirut, but with bombardment also in the Bekaa Valley, people are leaving from there also. So the streets are full of people fleeing for their lives. Everyone is terribly afraid.
Were agencies like yours prepared for this bomb? Did you see it coming?
Yes. Yes, we've been working to make sure that we are prepared since October the 8th of last year. We saw the increase in tit-for-tat attacks on both sides of the border that has continued over time, and we've maintained our preparedness. But the speed and severity of the situation that is now developing around us is a lot for anyone. As you heard from local aid workers on the ground, everyone now is fighting against the clock to give the refugees, the displaced people, the materials and the money they need to be able to survive the displacement as they've run from their homes.
How well is the country's infrastructure holding up, Bob? Because Lebanon's been suffering from numerous crises that we heard about in our report there. Is the country holding together in terms of its electricity grid, the supply of water, the ability for people to move around?
Well, when this number of people move from one area of a country to another, yes, they place an understandable strain on all of the systems. We have now tens, hundreds of thousands of people sheltering in schools, in gymnasiums and other public buildings that weren't structured and sustained to look after them. So everyone now is joining hands, distributing supplies, trying to keep things together. The need to bring an end to the fighting is already very present.
Well, the U.S. and other countries are calling for a 21-day ceasefire across Lebanon, the Israel-Lebanon border. How important is that from a humanitarian perspective?
It's critical. I can't underline how critical it is to give aid organizations a chance themselves to maneuver people and commodities to get them in the right place safely so we can attend to the needs of the population that has moved without fear of bombardment. We have our own staff who are displaced. We have our own staff who have been affected by the bombardment. So ourselves just looking after our own families so that we can then look after the families of those who have displaced.
What would you say, Bob, is most urgently needed in Lebanon right now?
Well, right now, as we just said, ceasefire is number one. We've got to stop the bombardment so aid organizations can help people. People can look after they're sick and they can find out where they're going to stay long term. It'll buy time for the peace conversations to happen. Next is we need additional funding. Lebanon is a country that has sustained, as you said, refugees from Syria for a long time, but the resources they have as a state and as a humanitarian community is not sufficient to be able to afford for this number of people with new and pressing humanitarian needs. So they're number one and number two. Space from the fear of bombardment and then additional funding to be able to look after the humanitarian needs of people on the move.
Bob, thank you very much for taking time to talk with us today. That was Bob Kitchen, Vice President of Emergencies at the International Rescue Committee.